Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. I'm Marwan Makanmaka, President of the FCCT and correspondent for the Interpress Service News Agency. It's always a pleasure to have a packed house. Some of you are familiar faces, some of you are not. This club is open to journalists and non-journalists. Do feel free to join us. There are lots of benefits. This evening's event is the result of a relationship the FCCT has established with International Peace Foundation. And the Peace Foundation does bring a regular series of high-profile speakers. One of them is Mr. Oliver Stone, who we are going to hear this evening. Uwe Morawetz, the head of the International Peace Foundation, will say a few words and then introduce Mr. Stone, and then he would speak. We would follow the usual format. After the speaker finishes, there's a mic at the back, and we will open the session for Q&A. Please restrict yourself to one question. Don't deliver speeches. If you do, I'll just cut you in mid-sentence, because the whole purpose is to have a friendly and enlightening dialogue with such a well-established and famous filmmaker. So may I first ask Uwe to say a few words. Uwe.
Yeah, good evening and welcome to the third ASEAN event series, Bridges, Dialogues Towards a Culture of Peace. Bridges is facilitated by the International Peace Foundation, a non-political, non-religious foundation under the patronage of 21 Nobel Peace Prize laureates based in Vienna. Its current series of Bridges is being continuously held in Thailand, Cambodia, and the Philippines from November 2009 until April this year as an independent contribution to the Decade for Culture of Peace and Nonviolence, which was initiated and promoted by the United Nations General Assembly. It follows a series of 350 events, which the International Peace Foundation has already hosted in Thailand, the Philippines, and Malaysia since 2003. 35 Nobel laureates, as well as 13 other keynote speakers and artists, including Dr. Hans Blix, Chucky Chan, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, Vanessa May, Jesse Norman, Demanito Roddick, and Dr. James Wolfenson, participated in these events, which until now reached an audience of 150,000 participants. The aim of Bridges is to facilitate and strengthen dialogue and communication between societies in Southeast Asia with their multiple cultures and faiths, as well as with peoples in other parts of the world, to promote understanding and trust. The events build bridges with the local universities and other institutions in Southeast Asia to establish long-term relationships with Nobel laureates in all fields and with other keynote speakers and artists, which result in common research programs and other forms of collaboration. By enhancing science, technology, and education as a basis for peace and development, the events aim at a better cooperation for the advancement of peace, freedom, and security in the region with the active involvement of the young generation, ASEAN's key to the future. I'm grateful to our long-term partner, the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, as well as to our sponsors who have enabled us to make the idea of Bridges a reality. So let us welcome today Hollywood legend Oliver Stone, whose work has earned him 3 Academy Awards. We are honored that he has agreed to come to Thailand to support the events, and we all look forward to his keynote speech and to his important contribution to build bridges. I would also like to announce the presence today of Lily Hayslip, the woman whose life has been portrayed in Oliver Stone's movie Heaven and Earth, which he filmed here in Thailand. Welcome, Lily Hayslip. And a warm welcome, Oliver Stone.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Uwe, for your generous introduction. I think I'm above camera here. There you go. I actually struggled today to prepare remarks for tonight because I spoke this morning to a group of high school students and I adjusted my remarks accordingly to talk to people who were starting out in the world. I knew I would be facing people tonight who had lived their lives, a lot of them, and were fairly well along. So the remarks that I hope you understand, the remarks I made this morning would not be appropriate for tonight, and I was struggling, as I say, to come up with a theme for you hardened people, hardened especially foreign correspondents, as you know, are famous for drinking, and I see quite a few of you at the bar, so I hope some of what I say will make some sense to you, but not seem too pedantic or pretentious. But, you know, it's a hard thing to walk these lines and sort of say something that means something to you and at the same time not look silly. And talking about peace to foreign correspondents is not that easy because most of them don't believe it's possible. I know that having traveled a lot of the world, I'm pretty cynical at times and skeptical about the processes of the noble aspirations of politicians and diplomats to bring peace to the world. But we try, you know, we go on and we try. So forgive me if I sound perhaps too Harvard-like or Yale-like, but I'm going to try to make a point, and I'll leave it at that, and then I'll open it up for, I'd love to have questions and see what you guys are thinking, if at all. I saw a couple of friends that were fairly well along tonight in their intake of wine and beer, but I'm looking forward to it. Anyway, look, what can I say to you guys? Because most of you have been there, know what I'm saying. In my lifetime, you're journalists, most of you, and you'd like to hear stories, and we all have a narrative. We follow a narrative line. The problem, as you know, with a lot of first draft history being journalism, is that the narrative is very quick. You guys have to decide, or guys and women have to decide on the day often what the angle is, and the angle is quick. You don't have much time to think about it. It's over. People like myself and historians, dramatists and historians do have the luxury of more time, and we can look at the patterns of history and in our lifetimes and see things that you were not able to see in the newspaper. The newspaper can be very difficult to read in the morning for people such as ordinary laymen because it's such a bauble of events and mostly bad news, pessimism, horrible things happening every day. And we emphasize the bad news. We never really emphasize the good news, the development of society, the teachers who go to work every day, the doctors, the scientists, the people who the mailman and the ordinary people who do their job and who don't get press coverage. And so much good gets transferred every day. Our societies generally are working, but we would not know that from reading the newspapers or watching television, especially not in the United States. Whereas television, as you know, in the 1980s was turned into a for-profit institution. Originally, when I grew up, the television airwaves were owned by the public. They were supposed to be owned by the public. That was what the Federal Communications Commission was about. In about 1982, Larry Tisch, who bought CBS, said, well, look, the news division will now be for profit. And he declared it peremptorily, and it was quite a shock at the time, and people were objecting to it and so forth, but it did go private. And as a result, the news in America became very, even worse than it was. It became short-sighted, it became a soundbite, and it became for entertainment purposes. And before you knew it, the news was competing for the attention of the public and using every cheap device possible including the O.J. Simpson trial and all the murders that occurred and so forth and so on. And that's frankly why I did Natural Born Killers in 1994 in protest against what I saw as a media landscape that was exploiting violence. It's gotten worse, and the television stations are now making the only divisions that seem to be making any money at NBC in America, which is under threat now, is the news division. It makes so much money that it's become a jewel of NBC. Is that good? No, it's terrible. Because the news should not be making money. If it were making money like that, it's because it's entertaining and they're selling sound bites and superficiality and all the things that we see in People magazine and we hate. And that's what it is. It's just unwatchable because it doesn't even bother to do what at least the print newspapers are doing, which is to at least probe a little further and get some real, perhaps, dissent and reassessments. In that vein, in my lifetime, I look back in my 60s and I see a series of call them mass illusions, and no one made me aware of them when I was young, but I would like to point out that on a huge social scale, I've lost count, but whether it was, really the first great illusion of my life, or call it even a conspiracy, was one that my father and and the silent generation from World War II sold us, the so-called greatest generation, sold us that communism was a world conspiracy that was threatening my country, the United States, in a death grip, and that China and Russia were united, as well as Yugoslavia and all the countries in South America that were looking for change. Any aspect of social reform was viewed as communism for the most part, and in Asia too. And this is why I ended up in Vietnam, because it was the hysteria about communism. And now, of course, with time, with insight, and with historians writing deftly about it, we now see that we were prey to so many illusions in our lifetime, and that hurt us and killed millions of people in Vietnam, where Lê Ly is from, as well as in Cambodia, where I'm going tomorrow. Thailand managed to stay out of this thing for the most part. But anyway, look, the world has suffered greatly from this illusion, this delusion. And more recently, of course, we have the Bush and Blair march to war, false war in Iraq. And I saw my media in America, the liberal media, the center media, support that war, as they are now supporting Afghanistan war. They also supported Iraq 1, which many people have now, with historical hindsight, re-examined and are beginning to re-examine. At the time, I remember being a proponent also, said, let's go for it. Iraq 1 made sense. The more I read, the more I know, I have to re-examine my own prejudices. Certainly the second war in Iraq was a shock to me as a Vietnam veteran, and it was probably the worst 10 years of my life have just expired, I hope, but I'm not sure anymore after the news this week. But I thought this last decade was perhaps worst decade of my life under Mr. George Bush Jr. I've made 3 films about Vietnam, and many of them had great impact, except for Heaven and Earth, which was not appreciated in America because it was about Vietnamese people. But I saw Vietnam become Iraq by another name. Beyond that, I saw the lies of the Reagan administration, deep lies in the 1980s, in Central America, where I did the film Salvador, which some of you may have seen. It was about foreign correspondence, about a scoundrel I knew called Richard Boyle, wonderful truth-telling scoundrel from Ireland, Irish-American. I saw it most blatantly in Nicaragua, but it was no less evil than our policy under different presidents with different words in their mouths in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. In my lifetime, in Guatemala, which was a bloodbath, which we destabilized that government in 1954. In Brazil, a police state at that time. Chile, a horror show. Argentina, the war that disappeared. And many other countries around the world. We can't even begin to name the countries. I think William Blum compiled by Freedom of Information Act, I think we intervened in about 60 or 70 countries, America, to fight communism. I saw it in other countries as well. I'm not going to single out necessarily America, except that it's the most powerful country at this time militarily. But we saw it in France. We saw the collaborators work. I mean, my mom's French, and I was always hearing about the French resistance as a kid. You would think my mother's family, my entire family was in the resistance. It wasn't. Most Frenchmen went along with the Nazis. Not that they collaborated, but they lived. They had to coexist. But that was a great mythology about the resistance in those countries. And the Russian contribution to World War II was diminished and hardly talked about in America. The great loss of life and the great war that was fought in the East. And at the same time, when I was researching dissidents in the 1980s in the Soviet Union, there was another form of denial, which was that these people who were really courageous people opposing the regime, who were going to psychiatric institutes, the Russian people did not understand them, and I felt very sorry for these people. I tried to do a movie about it, but it could not get financed. But I remember at that time, this was in the Brezhnev regime, how much of a hero Joseph Stalin was to the people, to the average Russian who did not really know about the great purges and terrors and famines of that period, of the 1920s and 30s and 40s. Self-delusion of a population in denial and is overwhelming to me still at my age. I mean, in China, which I've visited several times, I see a new generation, young people crippled with amnesia, unable really to gain access to their own history. And then I see a generation of my age, older Chinese people, and men, women, and I'm amazed what they've been through in their lifetime, far more than I have, because they have lived a sort of a Lewis Carroll life where it's been a 180-degree turn in the middle of their lives. At the age of 30 or 40, they've moved from collective communism and worship of one god, Mao, to a brutal, highly brutal, competitive individual consumption and corruption in the name of another god, money. The Russians too, by the way, that generation, although most of them have died because their life expectancy was so short, but so many Russians went through communism to robber baron capitalism in the 1990s and 2000s, particularly under Yeltsin. I think we all lie to ourselves in some way during the course of our lives, and I cannot fault ourselves for doing so, because the forces of history and conformism are very strong, and they pull us along. We go to schools, we have to conform, most of us. We don't want to get thrown out. Our parents, we live in a way that we have to be generous to ourselves, otherwise we will probably end up like some of these poor dissidents in a psychiatric hospital taking medication and being force-fed. And I've seen some people who have suffered so greatly and been killed or went to prisons. I mean, it's a very hard price to pay to be a nonconformist in these societies. So we have to forgive ourselves for our mistakes. And I'm not a moralist on this issue, and I don't want to be the guy who's always saying, resist, 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 because we're scared. I'm trying to be a realist, though. And as life goes, I'm trying to undo some of these knots of perception that we all have, and I have, so that we can get a more truthful view of the world, and certainly, for me, my own place in it. And I've devoted some of my movies to trying to undo these knots. But I have to say, when you see the self-deception of societies on the level of China, Russia, the United States, or my own country, in its recent debacles in Iraq, I cannot help but wonder at the sinister perspicacity of the Nazi dictum, the greater the lie, the more readily it will be believed. I've seen so much evidence, and I'm sure you have, of in our life of history being rewritten. And what's more, I think we've come to accept it, that history belongs essentially to the victor. And that we can never, never, never underestimate the power of corruption to change and alter history. We may have believed briefly in the 60s and the early 70s that things would change for the better, but I think most of us have gotten a rather brutal awakening to the realities of existence. And I think the way life has worked since the beginning of time, I think history has been not available to most people. And as a society, I'm sad to say, I've come to find it's still very much like the third grade. And we behave like a lynch mob. We pile on. I've seen it again and again, whether it's in a combat platoon in the grip of fear and wild rumor in Vietnam, or a student revolution without rules, or whether the strongest rule through intimidation, or Wall Street stock madness, or 2001 9/11 hysteria, and an immature president who divided an unsettled citizenry for political advantage. And nor can I forget vividly how many liberals supported that stampede as a result of not clear thinking and fear and terror, and granted Bush Jr. his war powers. That too was a conformist mob. In the name of not being hated for our dissent, we, the American people, signed off through our legislators on most of our essential liberties, on habeas corpus and on torture, without knowing it. I would say to you, we don't even have rights anymore. They're gone, because every American I know of any sensitivity has some innate understanding and fear that each and every one of us can be listened upon. Our email and bank accounts, our medical records, our sexual priorities can be known. And at the end of the day, we can be destroyed financially, reputationally, and even physically by our own government and media, if they so want it. The right to any privacy at all has been sacrificed on the altar of this false god, national security. And it has happened as much of evolution happens in unseen, quiet, in the middle of the night conditions. It's apparent to me that it comes not as a coup d'etat, it comes as a fait accompli. The other day in America, for those of you who were paying attention, the Supreme Court voted again 5-4 to basically, essentially emphasizing again the right of corporations to contribute any amount of money to political candidates through propaganda groups, not directly, but through propaganda groups. So what you're saying is that my money or my vote is essentially the same as Exxon's $100 million into any issue that they want. This is the end of democracy as we know it, because we can be buried by money, and it's perhaps always been the case, but now it's gotten worse. And the court again reaffirmed that the corporation is a human being and has the rights of a human being. So we find ourselves in this perilous time, and it's a dark time. It's darker than anything I've known in my 60 plus years. And what are we to do? Are we to acquiesce? Do we have a choice? Are we to die like slaves? Or is it possible, like Spartacus's, to resist? To join others in an assembly of honesty and goodness, and find ways to restore decency to this rather terrifying world? What are we to do? Can we heal ourselves? Not only ourselves, and in the process, can we heal our planet? Can we legislate clearly and collectively an end to carbon emissions into the atmosphere? We know we can, but can we do it? It takes a collective will, and like lost children, we all look to the leader who will take us to that will. We want it, and yet we don't seem to need it enough. And it's need, that one need, and it's through that sweat and toil of needing, not wanting, needing, that we will get it. So I believe in our movies and our dreams, I can help, people like me can help a little, a lot, to point out that this will happen if we wanted to. I think Mr. Cameron, with his blockbuster Avatar, has made a film about an ecological paradise to remind people of the alternatives. And in so doing, he has, whether he admits it or not, has crawled into the unconscious of the world and perhaps has done a great deal of good. Although he denies, again, that the movie has any political implications. And so it is with movies. They work best subversively, as guerrillas of the mind. They approach the individual in the dark and revive the memory of how things can be. And sometimes, though rarely, these films can create a collective action. But as my experience of making Vietnam movies, or Salvador, or JFK, or W, or Alexander, has taught me that we must accept our limitations with humility and hopefully with a deeper understanding of our weakness and frailties. We must undertake every one of our actions with all the ardor we can muster. At the same time, we must be able to walk away from the result of our action with detachment, even if it is loss. But I won't give up believing that movies can help in some way, as I said, by expressing the best in us to help others to connect, to light a candle in this darkness, to our memory, to our imagination, and to our civilization. I hope in my daily life to struggle to keep my consciousness growing and not to fall asleep, which I've done many times in my life. I want to teach my children by broadening their minds as best I can, by traveling them to other experiences in the world, by teaching them where I can my own tolerance and appreciation of what freedom is, and reminding them by example the price at which it comes, by which I not only mean silver. I hope people will leave our movie theater renewed and made sacred again, that movies can heal the tribe and not tear it apart. I really want to believe there is something beyond the physical. There is within us the great metaphysical, a reaching to the stars to survive, an ability to overcome our differences and obstacles, and even the greatest of them all, the warming of this planet. Rothke wrote, "In the dark time, the eye begins to see." In that vein, we must all remember, we are in this together. We drink the same water. We struggle under the same sun. We all sleep, eat, love, hate, with a similar passion and hurt. And as stupid as we often are, we must understand that and we do understand that it is in our interest and to our profit to survive together as a species. How can we help? Certainly we can all help. You can help by thinking a little more about the positive side of things and not give in so quickly to the negative. It is easy to criticize. It is so hard to build. We must, through our movies, our journalism, pay homage to the glory of that building spirit. And as to close, our Robert Louis Stevenson, I'm quoting from memory as best I can, in his essay on Christmas Carol, said something to the effect, the highest standard we have is to learn to coexist with our own existence. The Gordian knots of life cannot be cut. They must be unraveled smilingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that thought-provoking opening remarks. We have a mic over there. As I said, anybody here is invited to ask questions. Just do me a favor, introduce yourself, limit yourself to one question, and as I said earlier, don't make statements, I'll cut you in mid-sentence. We would like to have a dialogue. Please. Anybody has a question?
Yes, please.
Could you speak up?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Is the mic on?
I don't know. It sounds like it's on.
Okay, fine.
All right, mate. Method acting, as espoused by Strasberg, Meisner, Stella Adler, created some of the greatest stars of American cinema. Did the method as a philosophy have any influence on your work?
I will take what the actor gives me in terms of his process. I accept the process. Some actors will come to you that way. Fewer now, I've noticed. But certainly I've found every different approach. My job is to bring together a collective. We all serve an idea. And I work with many types of people, different approaches. For example, Anthony Hopkins will, in the midst of the heaviest scene, be joking around in between. It's just the way he is. You know, he works from the outside in, or he calls it the English method. Sometimes an American actor will take things so ultra seriously that when he comes on the set, he has to have silence, and he makes everybody else miserable. But we go along with it because that's the way he is. So it's some actors just forget their lines and need earwigs. But it doesn't matter. What matters is what goes on the screen, and that's something you have to come to understand. That takes perhaps a little experience. When I was younger, I used to get upset sometimes with the methods employed. But as I've gotten more older and tolerant, listen, anything that works, buddy. I just want it to work, and that's really the key to directing a movie.
Next question.
Yeah, I'm from Sawali Pattaya TV in Pattaya.
You were in Alexander as
That's correct, sir. How are you?
You were excellent, by the way. Method acting was spectacular.
Thank you very
I think
much.
you were actually drunk in the scene.
I could have been. When do you think you're going to start shooting your Pinkville?
Ooh.
Oh.
Well, that was a sad story. Unfortunately, Pinkville was a movie we tried to make in late 2007. We were scheduled to go in Thailand, in Chiang Mai. We built the entire village. We had the whole thing cast. I think we were 3-4 weeks out when the hedge fund that was supporting the movie through United Artists pulled out. Which was actually interesting in hindsight because I didn't know then, and nor any of us knew that late 2007 was when the whole home mortgage fantasy was starting to come to the light, and the toxic so-called assets that these banks had was much heavier than anyone thought. As a matter of fact, I was at a dinner in New York, and I remember some two stockbrokers from Merrill Lynch came over. Merrill Lynch was bought. And they said, Bank of America is in the hole for $14 billion. And $14 billion, wow. We were all amazed. But as I think ultimately Bank of America went in the hole for Steve, was it 60, 70 billion? So, I mean, the numbers were much bigger than anyone even knew. But even in 2007, Pinkville was dead. When can I shoot it? It was about My Lai massacre. It's one of the most popular subjects in America. But it's a horrible massacre that occurred in 1968 in March. And we went, Leili was with me. We went to the village of My Lai. And wow, it's a great story. It must be told. It's also an investigation. It's not just a massacre. It's a really suspenseful investigation. And I hope to God we can get it made someday, but we're going to have to scrape.
Well, I hope you tell your story.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hello. I was wondering, you've been talking basically about a kind of secret history that's been going on that we're basically not aware of through the media and through our daily lives as Americans. And do you have any plans of kind of making an all-encompassing film or documentary that deals with exposing some of that historical history, or perhaps something along the lines of, instead of showing the evil presidents of America, something like about Thomas Jefferson, for example, or Andrew Jackson, showing these kinds of problems and concepts that even they back then were warning us about?
Well, certainly, it's a funny thing you ask, but I have been working on a 10-hour documentary called, which is coming out hopefully at the end of this year. This is my third year on it, with 2 historians and a staff of archivists and editors. It's called, for now, The Secret History of America.
Bravo! Is that going to be for television or for the theaters?
Showtime has bought it for America, and Fremantle Abroad, which is an English company, a very good one. So we'll get this out there. This is a major, precisely for the reasons of my feeling that there's no way to deal with this thing in a feature film length, because a feature's narrative is driven by the needs of one showing in 2.5 hours. I really felt that this could be my legacy to my children, to teach them perhaps another way to think about history, because they're not getting history in schools and they're not getting it on television. I don't know if you've seen the History Channel, but it's a hodgepodge of easygoing mythologies. You know, it's very hard to challenge orthodoxy on television. And I guess I saw one Ken Burns documentary too many, and I must have had a reaction. But I really thought it started for me with this World War II issue, which really got to me. The issue of, the way Ken Burns made it sound as if America won the war and beat the Germans. It's just not true. And this becomes a larger story, a much larger story, as well as the story of the atomic bomb and why it was dropped. It's a crucial story to understanding this whole post-war national security state that has come to be. The bomb has determined so much of our thinking, has made us, frankly, I mean, it's very difficult for the American mind to put to get its grasp around the idea of a war, a real war, where we sacrifice, because so many Americans are used to having the superiority of the bomb. The concept of what the Russian people went through against the Germans, where 20 to 25 million of them were killed, is way beyond the memory of most Americans and people in the West. And I think this is why it's important. History is important to remember these things and the meaning of the bomb, because the bomb is very much with us now. And this is a bomb that is not, as you know, much more powerful than the bomb at Hiroshima. This is a bomb that will threaten the life on this planet. So we're threatened in a way that is. We're threatened by the concept of using it without thinking. Mr. Bush Jr. was the most dangerous president perhaps in history, because he, in his nuclear policy review, I forgot of the 2004, I believe it was, or 2002, they blended once again, back as they did in the 1950s, they blended the concept of using conventional weapons with nuclear weapons. This is a neoconservative position. This is a very serious. So I think Bush's policy allowed for nuclear bombs to be used against evil terrorists, which means anybody he says is evil can be nuclear bombed. Essentially, you should examine that document. It's an amazing document. But Bush is part of an ilk. He's part of a group that doesn't see the danger of the bomb and doesn't understand history. I don't think Bush did too well at Yale in history. In fact, I don't think he did too well in learning it. I don't think he has much attention span or grasp of concepts. So this is really important, and you're right. It's called secret history, but that's a misnomer because it isn't secret. It's on the front page of the newspapers. It has been on the front page of the newspapers, but it's been neglected.
You can see it on YouTube.
Neglected, well, maybe one day, but
I find you
unfortunately,
get the best
there's no way
news
to
on
make any
YouTube.
money on
Hang
YouTube.
hang on. Let him answer.
The neglected history of the United States, or the forgotten history, perhaps. Anyway, we are struggling with this, but we cannot go back and do in 10 hours. We cannot cover Jefferson. So we really do start with we deal with the 20th century and World War I, and actually we compare the 1900 election of McKinley versus William Jennings Bryan is a very interesting key election with the Gore-Bush election of 2000, which is parallel. So we try to make parallels. It's not a conventional history which is linear. This is really looking for patterns, as I said earlier when I was talking about.
Next question. You've got to go up there. Sorry.
Robin W. Martin, Bangkok. As a movie maker who has worked in 2 millennia, the 20th century and now the 21st century, do you think...
I sound like 200 years old.
Excuse me, you don't look that old, Oliver. Do you believe that the message can be got across better to the movie-going public now by movies such as James Cameron, allegorical novels, or Lord of the Rings, or other things like that, or historical novels, or historical movies such as you make? Which way do you think the movie-going public can receive the message that directors are going to put across in the new millennia?
I think that's too broad a generality. Whatever works, as I said about actors, I think that Cameron has done a spectacular job, as did Peter Jackson. I mean, there's great filmmakers, and they're doing good work. I mean, I do remember this, the press in America was saying the movie business is over, blah, 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 and we had the biggest year ever last year. And frankly, the movies were good, in my opinion. Whenever they start saying one thing, I always get the chill runs up my back. I try to avoid what the mass is saying. I keep telling my business manager when all the lemmings are going off the cliff, please try to change the direction here. So I'm a contrarian. I'm called a contrarian, but damn it, the movie business did not die. I do believe that young people, no matter what they say about them, are interested, yes, in the 15 minutes and the 5 minutes and the cell phone and all this, but I do think they still like a narrative, and they would still go to a 2-hour narrative story. There's a belief in it, a desire for it, as old as the caveman, as old as Homer, as old as the medieval ages, and as old as the art of movies. And it's been proven again by a series of movies this fall. And Mr. Cameron leads the pack. He has created a fable, and it works. And the fable is very modern.
Next question.
Good evening, Robert Kinnear, Alternative Innovations. I had the pleasure of working with you as an extra in Heaven and Earth way back in '93.
Wow.
So hi again. Given that the Vietnam War is probably the greatest event that took place in the last century, or even up until now, even greater than the Second World War in the tonnage of bombs dropped, which is cumulatively larger than those dropped up to the Vietnam War, and cumulatively since and ever will be, a huge number of cluster bombs dropped, which killed vast numbers of people, as you mentioned, in Vietnam. 3 million Vietnamese died, 2 million of whom were civilians. How do you deal with that, or what's your opinion, rather, regarding the war crimes against humanity and war crimes, the trials currently taking place in Cambodia, made by the Khmer Rouge, when, if I may use the rather sloppy term, a mere 1.5 million people died, and put that into context with your 25 million you refer to in Russia?
I think we have an enormous story to tell. I think it's very difficult to deal with all the thousands of, and I say literally thousands of incidents of brutality and injustice around the world. There's so many countries. We have to go for the big story, the patterns. And certainly the atomic bomb, the Hiroshima story, is the beginning of a new way of thinking in this world. So obviously we have to minimize in a 10-hour series like this. We cannot deal with all the injustices. And believe me, I get letters on every single subject. I get all the causes in the world. pass in front of me, and it's too much for the human mind. You have to make, frankly, you have to make these things exciting and entertaining, and that's what people, otherwise they're going to turn it off. They don't want to hear about how horrible everything has been. So you have to find a way to, like Cameron did, to tell a narrative that's exciting and makes you turn the page and watch that next segment. Hardest thing to do is a movie. On a book, I love books, but you can put it down, you can savor it, you can turn it. Tomorrow you can read another chapter. Make a movie, you're out the gate, and you better not stop.
Next question.
Hello, I'm Tip from Thai News Agency.
Could you speak up, please?
Yes, I'm Tip from Thai News Agency, and then you can hear? No. Hello. Yes, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay, I'm Tip from Thai News Agency. I have a question as a film director. Apart from Avatar and from your movies, do you think that American movies in this decade will tend more to focus on peace building, in your opinion, and why?
Will American films in this decade address issues like peace building?
In your opinion,
well, I think
why?
Avatar is an interesting example of that, whether he admits it or not. There's a heavy allegory about technological superiority and the defeat of that by indigenous peoples. If you notice, their color is blue, and a white man joins them and he turns blue. And actually, Michelle Rodriguez plays a Spanish woman who turns on the helicopter force. And the nerds who help the hero are sort of Jewish looking and sort of different hairstyles. So I think there's a statement being made here. It's a very, Cameron's not going to admit it, of course, but it's a very strong statement that's going around the world. I mean, who are we talking about? Those guys with all those helicopters and planes and bombs are pretty horrible people, aren't they? So I think you have to allow for allegory to work this in its own way. People tell stories in different ways, and it's going to come out. I think American movies can be very powerful. I have been in the forefront since Vietnam, since the Vietnam movies, of blasting some of these movies that have been made in America that worship technology. And I pointed, as you may remember, to Black Hawk Down. I found it to be an obscene movie, well made, very well made, in the best tradition, but an obscene movie that promoted the concept that these people were heroes for shooting down black people in Africa. And that the worship of these helicopters had a lot to do with George Bush's impression of war and going into Iraq War around that same time. If you remember, Black Hawk Down, was nominated for an Oscar. God damn it. That was amazing. And that was right around when Bush decided to commit himself to Iraq, Bush Jr., as a Vietnam veteran. It was pretty sad. And when you saw Iraq I, when George Bush Sr., when they attacked, they put that stuff on television. And Americans all over the CNN, it was shocking. It was a fire show, shock and awe. The bombs going off in Baghdad. Peter Arnett was reporting back in 1991. It was, wow, great. This was sort of the reaction. How powerful, shock and awe, how powerful we are. This was about 2 years after the Berlin Wall had come down. So, boy, for the military-industrial complex in America was out of business in 1989. It would look bad, but they were saved by Iraq.
Okay, next question.
Hello. Hi. You've mentioned Bush multiple times and Blair once. And I just want to know how films like W and Bush and Blair and name calling them all the time, how is that shifting the attention from the real culprits, which is each and every one of us, for letting them take us to war? Do you think that by mentioning the names so many oftentimes we shift the blame away from ourselves and onto the politicians that we wish to make scapegoats
I
of?
definitely do, yes. But, you say name calling, where do you start? I mean, Bush and Blair were characters in a movie where they were played, and they were very interesting characters. But through that process, that dramatic process of watching Josh Brolin play a character with some empathy, with some amusement, I think the audience, if they're paying attention, it's a subversive thing that's going on, because Americans did elect George Bush Jr. It's an amazing story. 2004 election is unbelievable to most of the world. The guy lied about Iraq. It was clear as a bell, and he still got elected because of national security. So he appealed in some fundamental way to the American mindset, and we have to deal with that. So that's what that movie is about. It will say to the future people in time, the young people who don't know this guy was elected president. This is the kind of guy he was, and why? How did he get this? How was he popular? Why did he get elected? You know, it's you got to start somewhere. To make a vague movie where you name corporate figures is also a technique that can work, and it has worked. But it has to be a well-told story.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Art. I'm a student from Shrewsbury International School, and I was just wondering, because looking at your filmography, it seems that you've never done a sequel before, and I was wondering what motivated you to do Wall Street 2.
Well, 22 years later, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a shock to me. My father was in Wall Street, so I loved I got a chance to do a business movie, which is very rare in America. They don't have that genre, and we actually did well with it. Well enough so that it became a form of franchise. And 20th Century Fox, came back and they said, we'd like to do Wall Street, second Wall Street, another story about now. At first I didn't want to do it, but then when the 2008 crash happened, that became the hook for me, by which it became important again. This is a very fundamental and dangerous time, as I said, and this last near meltdown of was a credit bubble of tremendous significance. It was, if you want, a heart attack, a major heart attack for capitalism. And we're back out of the hospital after our quadruple bypass, and drinking those martinis and chowing down on cholesterol. I don't know where this is going to go. Was that a warning? It's a very serious warning. Yes, I do believe so. And I think a movie can be made out of this. But we're dancing on the Titanic, we're changing deck chairs here. But anyway, as to the movie itself, it's a whole other ballgame because the characters are different, except for Michael Douglas, and he has a daughter. Shia LaBeouf is sort of a young investment banker who's a very bright trader, and I don't want to reveal too many details. But Josh Brolin is the middle generation. He's in his 40s, and he's also a highly successful investment banker. So you have three generations clashing. And just to reference Wall Street one more time, in 1980s is which I thought was shockingly excessive compared to my father's generation. $1 million was a ton of money. In 2008, $1 million was not serious money in Wall Street. $1 billion was. I'm stunned by that. $1 billion is 1,000 million. To start a serious hedge fund on Wall Street, you need several $1 billion. $1 billion itself is not that respectable. Think about those numbers, and you will understand the degree of distortion that has happened in 20-some years.
Thank you.
Next question.
Yeah, Willi Germund, Berliner Zeitung. You supported Obama in the election campaign. Given 1 year later what he did and what he did not do you regret that?
No, not at all, because I mean, look at the alternative, John McCain. We'd be bombing Afghanistan back to the Stone Age.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Mr. Stone. It's great to see another New Yorker here. Okay, well, I'm Penny Sunjit Karuna, and actually I was in New York as well. And, well, I well, it's more like a comment than a question to you, though, because I've been very impressed with some of the new movies that you've been producing, and especially like Salvador and those Nicaragua and Platoon. And I think by making this kind of war-related movie, you were trying to show to the world that there is it's actually a one coin with two sides. Like what you were trying to show that with all this war going on, there's always a possibility for peace as well. And each time that I left the movie theater, I always has a, like your movie always left me an impression that there's always a way to build peace. And you have done a great job in this way by using movie as a mechanism to bring peace to this world. And I think this is really great. And I myself being involved with United Nations in New York. Yeah, and the thing is that I've been trying to build peace through my own way, and I have two movie plots, which I would like to discuss with you into making that into a screenplay. And I was just wondering if we could actually work this out together in order to bring peace to this world.
Okay. That's your question for the night.
And by the way, by now I think John McCain would probably have had a heart attack and be incapacitated, and then we would have Sarah Palin as president. Think about that alternative.
Okay, next question.
Hi, my name is Guillaume Ellis, film student. I have two questions, if you allow me.
Just ask one first.
Okay.
Pick one.
Okay. What do you think of the present administration under Obama?
Oh, I think it's a shame that he appointed Clinton Secretary of State, and I think and reappointed Robert Gates as Defense Secretary. And I wondered at the time what's going on. These were early appointments, key appointments. So he surrounded himself with, and also the economic team. Geithner and Summers are the old school. It makes you wonder. He had a mandate for change. I think a very serious one, and it was a time for Roosevelt. I think by looking for consensus, he made a tactical mistake. The Republicans are boneheads, and they are really going after it. They're not making any deals, it seems, at all. And the concept of a filibuster majority, a filibuster-free majority, is outrageous to me. The Constitution has nothing to say about filibusters. There was as far as I know, a senatorial courtesy given to the opposition. And now it has become a tactic used freely so that a 60-vote majority is necessary. You cannot run any country, any government with that kind of a supermajority. You have to have a majority vote to run a government. So it's going to be impossible to run this government. This is a huge issue. I don't see the end of this. I mean, someone's got to call it. The only way to do it is to call the filibuster and let the American people see what it's like to block everything. They cannot just threaten it; they have to do it. And unfortunately, with this filibuster rule being ridiculously was undermined, it's no longer like Jimmy Stewart in the Frank Capra movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Well, that's wrong. They should make the person who goes filibustering, make him stand up in there and talk for hours and let the American people see. They would be ashamed of this hostage taking of democracy. It's a very upsetting issue.
Okay, next question, because there's
Hi, my name is Lynette Corporal from IPS Asia Pacific. Much has been said about audience being desensitized by what they see in the media or in films, violent films, for example, gore. My question is, how do you think people can deal, or the movie-going audience, or even people watching television can deal with, or effectively, or with maturity, with the limitations and shortcomings of the media and the films that they see, violent films that they see, and transcend and overcome and see the substance go beyond the form and really look into the substance, as you were saying earlier?
you're asking me how the mind works. And as I said in my note, in my remarks earlier, it's a great struggle. You know, we are trying to overcome so much false imagery, false history. I mean, I grew up in America where cop shows and cowboy series ruled. The cops always solved the case for the most part, and they were always doing the right thing, and the cowboys were always doing the right thing, and the heroes were the heroes, the bad guys were the bad guys. So as a result, we have an idiot generation who, I mean, even the politicians talk, we got the bad guys, or we're out there getting the bad guys. The military talks like that, you know, the bad guys. You know, are you kidding yourself? I mean, do you ever think about bad guys, good guys? I mean, do you ever see the way you might look to an Afghani? You may not be such a good guy. So anyway, we've got the language to generate it, and partly through television. And television, I mean, by the time a kid grows up in America, he's been soaked with about 10,000 hours of violence. I mean, there's no question that it's violence sells, and that's its selling product. It's a pernicious system, and it's a loop that goes around and around. You're asking a key question. It's like taking drugs. Television is a narcotic, and it's infused into our bloodstream. It's as dangerous, I think, as heroin or cocaine, really cocaine. And the war on drugs is in the wrong place. It should be the war on television.
Next question.
Good evening, Oliver. My name is Jeff Briscoe from Cyclone Pictures. I'd just like to ask you, have you got any advice for people that have written film scripts and yet unpublished, or have ideas?
Well, I think we all go through that. I wrote something like 8, 9 scripts when I was a young man, and they were all rejected, and I wrote treatments. But you can't. I kept at it. You have to persevere. You send them around. You hopefully get an agent who will represent it. It will be seen. It may not be by everybody you'd like, but hopefully it will be. It has upward mobility. So generally speaking, people are looking for good material. That's not to say your idea can't be great, but the execution is horrible too. And I mean, you have to write a screenplay that you want to turn the page. I get so many scripts. I can't read them, frankly. I don't have time. But great, noble ideas. But my God, you don't want to read past page 1.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have time for just 2 more questions.
My name is Denis Debac, a French citizen interested in finance. There's one script you don't need to write, and it's a fantastic story. Suppose I have an option on the story of Madoff. Can I talk to you after this meeting?
Really, I prefer you could send it to Uwe or to
Marwan.
Marwan, and Marwan can forward it to me. I really would not like to. There's so many of you are creative. I'm going to get hopelessly bogged down in so many ideas are in this room. But I will take a serious look at it, or have someone look at it on my behalf.
It is just a joke.
Oh. Not too many people here, it isn't.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Brenda. I'm a student from Shrewsbury International School, and I would like to ask your opinion of documentary filmmakers such as Michael Moore.
Sure, I am I very much enjoyed his work, very much. I think he's a very courageous man to say what he says. It's amazing how he's been denigrated in our country. He's an American, and and he's actually what he is. He is working class. He's from Flint, Michigan, and he calls it like it is. And he's been pointing up some of these defects in our country for so long that he's become politicized, and unfortunately he's become a lightning rod, like I did, and attacked without even being his ideas being considered. I mean, that's the problem with a contentious society where people are not listening anymore. But certainly he's been a valuable contribution to, I'm not saying he's always right, there's always flaws in every work, but he's made a valuable contribution to the national debate.
Thank you.
Just final question.
You talked about the growth distortions in Wall Street going from $1 million to $1 billion. Nowadays, it takes a lot of money to make a movie. Part of that is your salary. Part of that is the massive amount the actors are paid. Why are you worth it? why should you get paid gazillions, millions of dollars to be a storyteller, albeit an interesting storyteller? But if Wall Street's distorted, isn't the movie industry equally distorted? I mean, for an average American family to go see a movie, it's quite expensive as well. That's not related to your salary, but why are you worth so much?
Well, it's a market consideration, that's for sure. But I have to say this, that the market consideration for Wall Street zoomed up like 300-400 to 1, whereas the movie thing stayed very much the same as it did in the 1980s. Perhaps we were overpaid in the 1980s. On the other hand, I would point out that people who went into the movie business did work very hard, and at the same time probably went through many years where they didn't make any income. They were willing to forsake income in those years to succeed. In other words, you may have worked 10, 15 years to arrive at a place where you could sell a script or direct a movie or work as an actor. And believe me, that was very painful, and there sometimes if you hit a jackpot, it doesn't seem fair, but there is a strange balance to life. On the other hand, this Wall Street thing seems to be much more artificial, because Wall Street's job is to create, is to be the engine of capitalism, is to promote commerce, trade, to help the engine continue. And what's happened in the last few years is that Wall Street seems to be more concerned with its own profit than it does with the country. So this is why we had these debt vehicles that made no sense, that weren't helping anybody. Nobody except the bankers who are making bigger and bigger profits. Movies still have to work on another. If you don't make a movie that works for an audience, you're dead. You're dead in the water, and it's much faster, the turnaround, and tougher, because the corporations are no bullshit. Corporate accounting is very tough. It's reached another level of mercilessness. I mean, I would say the corporations who run movies have no resemblance to the 1980s. So you're working in a new field, but they're spending far more money on movies. But they're not paying more on salaries. They froze the salaries out in the 90s.
Please join me in thanking Oliver Stone for coming here, for providing us with a good evening. Thank you very much.